So we're going to start the 7th chapter of Nedarim. We are still in issues of language. We're going to stay, by the way, for another 2 chapters in issues of language before we get into the methodology for undoing vows. So in other words, the next 2 chapters are dealing with making vows, and then we close off that portion and we start learning how to unmake a vow. So we're going through all of these questions about language. And the previous chapter, the 6th chapter, dealt mainly with food. And now the 7th chapter is going to begin with food, but is going to move on to clothing. And we said before that these Mishnayot, and perhaps chapters of Mishnayot as well, are very much like Tehillim, in the sense that the first and the second, if you look at Tehillim very carefully, you'll see the first and the second part of a pasuk of a verse are connected, but very often the second part of the pasuk is connected to the first part of the next one. So it's a bit like a chain or a ladder. And then the second part of the next verse will be connected to the first part of the one after, and so on. So the first few sayings in this chapter of Mishnah are connected to the food that we had in the last chapter. But then, and particularly they're going to be connected to, we're going to begin with vegetables, which is where we left the last chapter. But then we're going to morph, we're going to change subject into clothes and to various other things too. We're going to go into issues of time, particularly. But we're going to begin with vegetables. Hanodeh min hayarak mutar ba diluim. Someone who swears he's not going to eat vegetables is permitted goods, permitted sort of, like pumpkins. The Rabbi Akiva oser. Rabbi Akiva prohibits. He says, look, no. If he's sworn off vegetables, he can't eat pumpkins. And they try to prove it. Amrulo, Rabbi Akiva, omer adam lishlucho kach liyarek. Someone says to his messenger, bring me vegetables. So someone will send someone off to the supermarket to get vegetables. I guess it's like a early version of those shopping cart services we have now. The Humer, lo matzati eled luim. And the guy will come back and he replied, I only found goods. In other words, the messenger seems to be saying, the messenger seems to be saying, look, goods are really different from vegetables, because the messenger will come back and say, no, I didn't find any vegetables, I found goods. So what's going on? So Rabbi Akiva is going to defend himself. Amar lahem v'chein hadavar. He said to them, that is exactly it. That's exactly the point. He comes back and he says, I could only find goods. Or Shema, Omer, Hulo, Lo Matzati Ele Kitnit. I mean, would he possibly come back? Oh, no, I only found pulses. The reason he comes back and he says, I found goods, is that goods is a kind of vegetable. Like you send your messenger out to the market. If he's not going to come back and say, oh, well, yeah, I only found soap, because soap is completely unrelated to vegetables. If he comes back and he says, oh, yeah, I found some nice pumpkins, it means a pumpkin is a sort of vegetable substitute. That's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. And that's how he's going to continue. So he's saying, I mean, would he say I only found pulses? Of course not. Because goods are a type of vegetable. They're included in the vegetable class. But pulses are clearly not included in the vegetable class. So Rabbi Akiva holds to his idea that, goods are a kind of vegetable. And we're learning about the boundaries of language. And as we've said before, we're learning about how language is used in practice. So we're learning about practical language, not theoretical language. And along these practical lines, we're going to continue. Be'asur b'ful mitzri. Be'asur b'ful hamitzri lach. He's forbidden fresh Egyptian, this is Egyptian fool. Now, we've all seen fool, right, in restaurants. If you go to Beersheba, right, they'll serve you fool in the restaurant. Fool are Egyptian beans. And they're translated here as beans. But it's just the same word, right? It's the word from the Mishnah. And we can eat these green beans nice and fresh, picked right off the bean plant, and they're like a vegetable. But hang on, we can also dry them up, right? And we sort of stir into soup, dried beans. We all know about fresh beans and dried beans. And we're going to make exactly the same distinction in the Mishnah between fresh beans and dried beans. He's forbidden fresh Egyptian beans, umutar b'yavesh, but he's permitted them dry, because he's sworn himself off vegetables. And a fresh Egyptian bean is a vegetable, but a dry bean, what is a dry bean? Well, let's just carry on now down the Mishnah. A dry bean is more like a grain, yeah? Because you pile it up in a heap in the market. You'd sell it out of a sack in the market, just like grain. And that's how the Mishnah is going to continue. You see, we're sort of bouncing from subject to subject, but each Mishnah is linked to the one before, like this chain. Hanoder min hatagan asur b'ful hamitzri, someone who swears off grain. And we're going to use the word dagan for grain. This is really important. Someone who swears off grain. Asur b'ful hamitzri is forbidden. Asur b'ful hamitzri hayavesh is forbidden dry Egyptian beans. That is, dry beans, you'd serve them out of a sack. Divrei Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir. But the sages say, Eino asur ela mechameshet haminim. There are 5 species of grain, wheat, spelt, barley, oats, etc. There are 5 species of grain which are particular to the land of Israel, and those are the species of grain, for example, that can become chametz, that are eligible for matzah, that are from which challah is required to be taken. There's 5 kinds of grain that basically are halachic grain, and actually they're probably defined by the fact that you can make bread out of them, right? Because you take challah from them, you make matzah out of them, so on. And when we use the word, when someone forswears grain using the word dagan, the sages say he's only forbidden to eat these 5 species. That's what grain means. Rabbi Meir is going to come back with a little nuance. Again, we're talking about language here and how it's practically used. Rabbi Meir Omer, hanoder mina tevua, someone who forswears produce. This is field produce. Field tevua is stuff that you get in from the field. So Rabbi Meir says, no. Someone who forswears produce is only swearing off the 5 species. But if you use the word dagan, actually, that includes everything. You're forbidden everything. So that's his argument with Chachamim in the first part of the Mishnah. His argument is about the word dagan. He would agree with the Chachamim with the word tevua. He agrees tevua applies just to the 5 kinds of grain, but dagan applies to everything. And the only exceptions are fruits of the tree and vegetables. Asur b'kol mutar b'seirot ha'ilan u'v'yarak. The only things he's permitted are fruits of the tree and vegetables. And of course, we're going to come back. We're finishing off the vegetables, right? The last word is u'v'yarak, with the vegetables, and now we're going to move on to clothes. Someone who forswears wearing clothes is still permitted sackcloth and curtain and blanket wrapping. These are all different kinds of wrappings, but not really clothes, or they're really uncomfortable clothes to wear. So they're some don't seem to be included in the prohibition on clothes. And similarly, Amar kunam semer ulei. If he says kunam, if wool comes upon me. In other words, remember we always said that kunam is a nickname for korban. Kunam is a sort of nickname for korban. Let me be a sacrifice if wool comes upon me, or maybe the wool becomes a sacrifice if it comes upon me, something like that. Kunam semer ulei. He's swearing himself off having wool on him. Mutar l'chasot b'gizei tzemer, but he can still cover himself with wool shearings, with snip-snops of wool. Because remember, we're talking about wool in the sense in which it's commonly used. I swear I'm not going to wear wool. But when I say wearing wool, it means wearing wool clothes. It doesn't mean sitting under sitting under a pile of wood shearing. And it's the same for flax. Pishtan ola, if he says, oh yeah, I swear that flax shouldn't come upon me. Mutar lechafsot, but anitzei pishtan, he can still cover himself with stalks of flax. This isn't linen clothing. This is just stalks of the raw stuff. It's not included in clothing. We're going back to the common meaning of the word rather than, if you like, the biological meaning. And then Rabbi Yehuda will now actually give us some more information, but again, making it clear that we're talking about context and intent rather than something technical. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hakol fi haneder. Rabbi Yehuda says it all depends on the vow. By the way, Kaufman is different here. Most printed texts say Hakol fi hanoder. It all depends on the vower, the person that makes the vow. Anyway, Kaufman says it all depends on the vow. Hakol fi haneder. It all depends on the vow. Ta'an vehezia. He was carrying something and he was sweating. And we know what it's like carrying an enormous load in the land of Israel, in the Galilee. It gets hot, right? Ta'an vehezia. He was carrying something and he was sweating. And he smelled terrible. They didn't have deodorant in the time of the Mishnah. So what is he going to say? Amar kunam semeru fishtimo linalai. Kunam, if wool or flax come upon me. Now, is he swearing not to wear wool or flax? Well, from context, he's not. He's just swearing never to carry the stuff. And that's how the Mishnah concludes. Mutar lechasot. He's allowed to wear them, right? He can cover himself with them as garments. Ve'asur lahafshil acharav. But he can't roll them up behind him and put them on his back. So in other words, the purpose of the content of the vow depends on the intent of the vow as it is sworn by the person that swears it, really. So language is context dependent and it's person dependent, depending on the situation that person finds himself in when he makes the vow.